Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Kiddushin daf Yud Aleph. We are at the two dots. We just got to the two dots on the 1, 2, the ninth line down. So we're going to begin with the first words on the 10th line. Hold on for just a moment. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go, and we will get started. So, as we mentioned at the conclusion of yesterday's daf, we're going to begin today with the Gemara's discussion of the debate we had in our opening Mishnah. Basically, the debate was Beit Shammai says that the minimum value for kesef is a dinar, and Beit Hillel says that the minimum value of kesef is a pruta. So the Gemara is going to begin by asking for Beit Shammai's reasoning. And basically, that's going to be the topic for today. And we'll turn to Beit Hillel, God willing, tomorrow. So we're going to give 4 explanations for Beit Shammai. And that will take us all the way to the top of Yud Bet Amud Aleph. So let's take a look. So the Kesef Beit Shammai Omrim B'dinar, that when it comes to Kesef, if somebody were to want to marry a wife with kesef, then you need to use a dinar. So the question the Gemara asks is, my time in the Beit Shammai, what's the reasoning of Beit Shammai? After all, if we're just talking about what is kesef, what constitutes money, so it shouldn't be that we require a dinar. A pruta is the minimum value of money. And so as a result, that should be the mechanism, that should be the sufficient thing to be considered the value for Kiddushin. Obviously, we're talking about where the woman is willing. We're not doing this against the person's will. But the point is that if she's willing to accept any kind of kesef, it should be acceptable. So why isn't it? Why isn't it the case that it's not acceptable? According to Beit Shammai. So we're going to have, again, 4 answers. So the first of the answers offered by Rabbi Zera is the following. Rabbi Zera, shekain isha makpedes al atzma. So we're because a woman is going to be, careful about what she's going to be willing to accept. The aim miskadeshes b'pachas medina, and the assumption is that she won't accept anything less than a dinar. And the implication being that if she were to accept less than a dinar, maybe we would say that, in fact, it's not a valid Kiddushin, because we're essentially going to say that most women would not accept anything less than that. And so we're going to say that she's not going to accept anything less than that, that every woman is not going to accept anything less than that. We're not going to allow it. But Amrle Abaye pointed out to Rabbi Zera, and we mentioned these daughters of Rabbi Yanai at the very beginning of the Masechet, when we talked about this question of sort of, can you be makbid and require something more? To kaptan on nafshayhu, they were very careful about themselves. And below makaji b'pacha mitarkaba to dinare, and they wouldn't agree to be married for anything less than 3 kav of dinarim, and Rashi notes that these are talking about dinarim of zahab, of the gold dinarim. So these are, very expensive coins that they would require in order if somebody wanted to marry them. So hachinami de ipashta yada v'kab l'chad zuza me'acher hachinami de lo havu Kiddushin, and yet you would say to me that if they reach out their hand and only accept a dinar, that it wouldn't be a good Kiddushin. Of course it would be a good Kiddushin. And yet these women accept something more. And so the interesting thing is that we could say, yeah, well, they are particularly unique, and we're following the majority of women, and therefore a majority of women would potentially accept only a dinar, and so therefore we should use a dinar as a limit. But the Gemara seems to view this as a sufficient question, meaning that once we have a variety, that every woman will have her own threshold for what she'll accept. So as a result, we shouldn't actually accept it. So none of this should be valid. We shouldn't be focused on the woman at all. So Amrale, no, pashta yada v'kibla lo kamina. I'm not talking about, so Rabbi Zerub says back to Abaye, listen, I'm not talking about where the woman sticks out her hand and is willing to accept something less than a dinar, that when he's explaining what Beit Shammai is saying, he's saying the following: Ki kamina de kitcha belilia. I'm talking about where they accept, where the person got married at night. Inami de shaviel shliach, or where she had a messenger, an agent. In those situations, then if because at the moment that the transaction is happening, she doesn't know the exact amount that is being transferred to her. If it's equal to a dinar or more, then it's fine. But if it's not, so that's the situation where Rabbi Zera would say that that's not going to be acceptable. And note, here we're saying that we don't allow a woman to accept less than a pruta, because that would not be considered kesef. So the point is that when it says that she stretches out her hand and accepts something less than a dinar, that's only going to be true for a dinar. It won't be true for a pruta, because after all, if a pruta is the lowest denomination of coin, from the rabbinic perspective, so then obviously anything less than that doesn't exist. Something, if you get two of something for a pruta, and then you use that object as one of those objects for the marriage, so it would be worth half a pruta. So then obviously that would not be sufficient to validate a marriage, because a Kiddushin, because that would be less than kesef. It would not even constitute kesef. Okay, so that is view number one. So again, the point is that she's willing to, whatever she's willing to accept is fine, as long as it's more than a pruta. But if in fact we have no idea what she's willing to accept, and she doesn't, and she accepts it in a context where she doesn't know the value, then it better be worth at least the dinar. Okay, because again, women don't want to receive something so small. So that's opinion number one. Now we go to Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef is going to offer opinion number two, and in the end, this opinion won't actually work, and we'll see why in a moment. So Rav Yosef Amar Kaimayu de Beis Shammai Kidarav Yehuda Amar Rav Yasi. That actually, well, it may work, but you will have to modify it. But in any event, so what's the reasoning of Beis Shammai? It's based on the concept of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav Asi. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Asi Kol Kesef Amar B'Torah Kesef Tzuri. That any time the Torah references kesef at all, it's always going to be the currency of tzur, of Tyre. And so, as Rashi says, "Kol kesef the amar v'Torah kesef tzuri im perish shkalim havi shekel tzuri." And if we say in the Torah that we're requiring shkalim, then we're talking about the shekel of tzur, of Tyre. Im stam, and if it just refers to kesef, havi matbeya hapechuta shebetzuri, then we're talking about the lowest denomination of tzuri, and the lowest denomination of tzuri was the dinar. Okay, and so
Rabbi,
yes,
that is a ridiculous statement.
Well, are you talking about the fact that because there was no coinage at the time?
There was no such thing as a coin at the time of Matan Torah.
Yes, that's certainly true. So obviously, I'm not going to provide any sort of basis. I don't know whether the coinage in Tzur was particularly early in terms of when coinage was, but
I don't think it was particularly early. Tyre was actually in decline at the time that money came around.
Okay, so I mean,
but it was close. It was prosperous, and it was close to Eretz Israel, which might have been the reason they wanted to make it the standard.
Right. Well, I mean, to me, where I'm going with this is that I think that what I'm trying to say is that especially because at that time kesef wasn't coinage wasn't the thing. We're going to go to the coinage that was in our area, that was the most important coinage at the time, at the closest possible time to where we're talking about. And so, that's where I understand it to be going. So, is it perfect? Not, but that's where I think this is heading, and that's why I think the rabbis are effectively, Rav Asi is essentially saying that we're focused on whenever the Torah talks about kesef, we're talking about the kesef of Tyre. So,
I think that the rabbis wanted to make it very clear for the benefit, this is like a tikkun olam thing, that you must use coins that are real and have normative value for the benefit of the society, for the benefit of the economy. And they made it so that you couldn't use like unminted slugs or ingots or
right.
stuff like that, I think. And it's certainly within their power to do that and invalidate transactions that didn't have that characteristic. But the historical context is just not accurate here.
Correct. 100%. At some point, they're saying effectively that we're going to understand kesef in the Torah along these lines, and that's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda is going to say. And we're going to see in the end that we actually didn't need Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav Asi to tell us this. That actually there's a Mishnah that tells us this, well before Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav Asi. So we'll get to that shortly. But the key point, the next point that was made by Rav Asi is Vishel Divrayim Kesef Medina. But when it comes to the rabbis talking about Kesef, they are talking about the local currency. And Rashi here tells us the transaction, the exchange rate between the local currency and the Tyrian currency, and that is Vishel. And in Rashi, Vishel Divrayim, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12 and 11 lines up. Vishel Divrayim Kesef Medina. L'kamim mefarish lo Kesef Medina shmini shebe Kesef Tzuri. That will explain that the value of the money in the provinces, the same coinage, the same coin name was worth 1/8 of the amount in Sur, in Tyre. So im selahu shminit shebesela Tzuri. That when we're talking about a sela, so then that would be 1/8 of a sela that is in Sur. Im dinar hu shminit shebedinar Tzuri. And if we're talking about a dinar in the provinces, so then that was 1/8 of a dinar that was in Sur. Hilka Peruta lo matzis l'meimar. In which case, there's no concept of pruta lepishe hishel nechoshes, and because it's made out of copper, ubitsuri matbeya shel nechoshes leka, and there was no copper coinage in Sur. Now, again, I don't know whether that's actually factually true or not, but in any event, that's what Rashi is telling us. Kiddushin, and when it comes to Kiddushin, kesef ksiv, right? We are requiring kesef because Gemira, that we learn kicha from Stay Ephron, and Stay Ephron refers to kesef, and so as a result, it must be kesef that is given, and kesef refers to the minimum coinage in kesef in Sur was the dinar. So the kevan the apikte mipruta. And once we removed ourselves from the category of pruta because it was made out of copper, alma midi de chashivus boy ukme adinar to come on. We're going to then establish that it's got to be something important, and so therefore you need to have it as a dinar, as we will see. So the bottom line is once we've eliminated the pruta as the coin, it's got to be the next sort of the lowest denomination in silver as opposed to in copper. So now we're going to challenge this. We're going to challenge this by focusing on did Rav Asi really say this? Now, in the end of the day, we can still say that maybe Beit Shammai believed in the current version of what Rav Asi just said, that basically every time kesef is mentioned in the Torah, it's talking about kesef tzuri, and so as a result, it's got to be a dinar, and that's the basis. But we'll see that in fact, Rav Asi's statement will have to modify it slightly in a way that wouldn't necessarily apply this lesson to our situation. But Gufa, is it really true? And we're going to have 4 questions. And again, we're going to start by citing Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav Asi's statement. Rav Yehuda, Rav Asi, Kol Kesef HaOmer B'Torah Kesef Tzuri. That anytime the Torah mentions Kesef, it's talking about the Kesef Tzuri. Michelle Devrayim Kesef Medina, and the money when the rabbis talk about Kesef, they're talking about the Kesef in the provinces, and so as a result, it's going to be 1/8 the value of the Kesef that would be referred to in the Torah. Uchlalahu, are you telling me that this is a general rule? And so again, we're going to now have 4 questions. They're very appropriate if we were actually around the time of Pesach, but we're going to have 4 questions. So here we go. Well, 1 second, when it comes to a claim, and we're talking about now where somebody says, I left money with you, or I left something with you, and the person comes back and says, no, this is what you left with me. We have the following in the Torah. Ki yitain ish, right? So this is from Shmot Kaf Bet, Pasuk Aleph. Ki yitain ish el re'ehu kesef o kelim lishmor. If somebody gives to their friend money or vessels to watch, Utanan, and we learned in our Mishnah, Shvuas Hadayanin Hatana Shtei Kesef V'Hahoda Shavapruta, that when it comes to a claim, the claim has to be 2 silver coins, and then the admission has to be at least 1 pruta. Meaning, if you miss less than a pruta, then you haven't really done a moda b'mitzvos, you haven't admitted partially. And so, as long as you need, but the claim has to be, and that's what's key for us, 2 silver mana. And yet we said kesef o kelim. Kesef, so we said, should be 1 a silver ma, excuse me, not mana, silver ma. So it should be 1 dinar, not 2. And so how come we're requiring 2 silver coins? So Hasam, meaning if in fact Rav Asi's statement is true, we should only require 1 silver coin. So Hasam Dunyut. Well, no, because we have the pasuk that says kesef o kelim, right? It says it compares kesef to kelim, and so ma kelim shnayim, just as kelim is plural and therefore refers to 2, av kesef shnayim. So 2, we're going to say that you need 2 coins. Uma kesef davar chashuv, av kelim davar chashuv, and we learn in the other direction that just as kesef has to be something of significance, so too the kelim have to be something of significance. So the bottom line is that we've answered this first question, and so now we're on to question number 2. V'harei maaser. What about when it comes to Meiser? Specifically the redemption of Meiser Sheni, where we'll see that the Torah mentions is kesef again. Diksiv b'tzarta ha-kesef biyadcha, that you should gather the kesef into your hand. Utnan, and what did we say? If you're going to exchange, for a sella, money of Meiser Sheni. So now, what are you going to? Again, a sella is a low value coin, and so that is how are you going to? What multiple coins are you going to be redeeming on them? Well, obviously you're going to be redeeming copper pruta on them, and so as a result, clearly the initial redemption of your coins, of your Meiser Sheni, must have involved prutot. But again, we have v'tzarta kesef biyadcha, that you should bind up the kesef in your hand. So how can you do any kind of redemption of Meiser Sheni using a pruta when the Torah specifically mentions kesef? And based on what Rav Asi said, we shouldn't be able to use prutot, because anytime the Torah says kesef, it means kesef of tzur. So kesef ha kesef riba. No, given the pasuk, it didn't just say kesef. It could have said tzarta kesef biyadcha. It could have just said without the letter hey. The fact that it says the letter hey, that comes to include something more. And so in that particular instance, we're going to include even copper coins can be used to do a redemption. All right, so the hare hektish. What about hektish? We have another situation in the Torah of redemption. Diksiv b'nasan hakesef b'kamlo, right? That you take the kesef and it becomes his, that the item that was hektish has now been redeemed. And we're talking about, obviously, not hektish of a korban, but hektish of money that is going to the Beit HaMikdash. For Amr Shmuel, hektish shavimana shechil lo al shavapruta. And Shmuel specifically says that you can consecrate property worth an entire mana onto property worth a pruta. And Rashi here is going to explain mechul. And in fact, if you did so, it would be redeemed. So, and how is that possible? If we take a look at Rashi, shechalalu al hapruta mechulal, right? That if you redeem it on a pruta, it is considered redeemed, and this is the last of the narrow lines of Rashi on Yud Aleph Hamabet. De'ain ona lehektish, because Rashi explains that there is no concept of ona when it comes to hektish. Namely, meaning that if in fact, in general, there's a prohibition in the Torah that's written by Yikra Perach Kaf Hey Pasuk Yudalid that says that one is not allowed to wrong his friend, his brother, and specifically we understand that means overcharging by a sixth or underpaying by a sixth. And so what we learn from that, but Diksiv Ish Es Achiv Ba'ashmi'inan Shmuel Deki Heichid Imut Ma'ona Imut Nami Mibitul Mekach. And so when do we have to worry about Ona, the prohibition of overcharging or underpaying? That is only when you are dealing with your friend, with your brother, with a fellow member of the tribe, as they say. But and Shmuel learns from this that just as we exclude situations of ona when you don't deal with somebody in that situation, similarly, we'll say that in those situations it is not an invalid transaction. So as a result, we'll have two things go along the same path, both the concept of ona and the concept of bittul mekach, that and these often do go hand in hand. That if in fact you have a prohibition of ona, then especially if you charge more than a sixth more, we say that the transaction is void, and everybody has to return everything to their original owner. And so, but what's the key here? What's the point that we're trying to make? The point that we're trying to make is, again, Shmuel specifically references a pruta as something that could be redeemed, and if as the method of redemption. And if in fact, since the Torah specifically mentions b'nasan hakesef, the kamlo, it actually refers to kesef, so too shouldn't we be able to say that you can't do any kind of redemption here for anything less than a dinar of tire, of tzur? So hasam nami kesef yelef mimaser. Well, the point is that it's interesting that it doesn't actually use that same ha kesef limud, but in any event, it says, it highlights the fact that we learn the redemption of hektish from the redemption of Meiser Sheni, and so as a result, we're going to learn one kesef to the other, and therefore we will apply this in this situation. As Rashi says, third line of Rashi, Gamar Pidyon Hakdish Pidyon Meiser. Well, they will learn the redemption of Hektish from the redemption of Meiser. Aval Shar Kesef, whenever other times it says Kesef in the Shibud Torah, Lo Yelef Mine, we're not going to learn from it. Delo Dama, because they're not comparable. V'od Dahafuk Safim Yisei Riksiv. And also, this has has an extra reference to the word kesef, and so as a result, we can learn it from that as well. And so the bottom line is that here we're going to allow the usage of a pruta, but when it comes to a woman's marriage, so then Beit Shammai would agree to Ravasi that anytime Torah says kesef, it means kesef, a silver of tire, and therefore has to mean at least a dinar. All right. So
there are actually Tanaic opinions that you can redeem Meiser Sheni on an asimon. We don't poskim that way. Those opinions were rejected, but eventually, that as late as the Mishnaic period, people were actually still considering that as a possibility. And that, I think it's was definitely Meiser Sheni. I think it's also in Edyo and Baba Metzia.
So in any event, certainly that is not totally inconsistent with what we've just said, because we noted the fact that ha-kesef comes to include additional items that can be used for the purposes of redemption. But so and we're going to see in a moment that we're going to have to reread Rav Asi's statement because of question number 4. So let's take a look at question number 4. V'harei kedusha isha diksiv. Well, 1 second. What is the implication of this answer, right? The answer that that Rav Yosef gave has a very interesting implication when you think about it from the perspective of Kiddushin. Because if you're telling me that Rav Asi's statement is that anytime the Torah mentions kesef, we are talking about the kesef of Sur, and therefore we need to be talking about a dinar. What about Beis Hillel? So v'harei kedusha isha tiksiv ki yikach ish isha uvala the gamar kicha kicha mistei Ephron. Right? We say ki yikach, and then we say that we're going to learn it from stay Ephron. Utnan Beis Hillel omrim bepruta b'shava pruta. Beis Hillel says that you can use just a pruta. So Nema Rav Asi de Amar Kaveh Shammai. Are you going to tell me that Rav Asi doesn't have the general principle that everybody knows, that the halacha is like Beit Hillel, and he's going to say that the halacha is in fact like Beit Shammai? That can't be. So as a result, we've got to reread the understanding of Rav Asi. And so as a result, there are 2 ways that you can think about this. One is that it's effectively a rejection of Rav Yosef's answer, or we could say that yes, that really Beis Shammai would say everything that we've said up to now is in fact Beit Shammai's belief that kesef in the Torah really means the kesef of Tzur. However, Rav Asi, when he made the statement, he wasn't talking about the general rule, but rather here's what he's saying. Atmar, this is what Rav Asi must have been saying. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Asi, Kol kesef katsuv. Anytime that we have a fixed amount of kesef, of money, of currency in the Torah, then we're talking about the kesef tzuri, the shel divrayim kesef medina. But when we're talking about a kesef that is referred to by the rabbis, then it's talking, and presumably kesef katsuv, then we're talking about the money that is the money used in the provinces. Okay, so my Kamash Malan, if that's the case, that you're telling me that we're talking about the value of money whenever the Torah tells us a specific amount, well, what are you telling us? Because we have that already in a Mishnah. Tanina Chamesh Slaim Shel Ben. If you talk about the 5 slaim for a son, namely a firstborn son, or Shloshim Shel Evet, or 30 for a slave. That's when a slave is killed by a gore, an ox that gores, and specifically the owner of the ox was some degree responsible to watch it because it was a muad, and then. So that's the 30 slaim. Chamishim shel onus v'shel mafate. Or when it comes to the 50 is the penalty that is paid by somebody who rapes or somebody who seduces an unmarried nara. So meya shel motzi shemra, or 100 that goes to the person that goes to the family of the if somebody defames his newly married wife. Kulam b'shekel kodesh b'mana tzuri. All of them are talking about the shekel, the holy shekel that is in the mana of tzur. Well, and therefore that clearly that's consistent with Rav Asi's statement that we're talking about the dinar of tzur, and therefore this is all going to be, why did Rav Asi, who came after the Mishnah, it was an Amora, why did he need to say this? His statement is already effectively covered. If we're going to limit his statement to kesef katsuv, to where there's a fixed amount, then he's already done this. And so, we've already learned this in a Mishnah. And again, this Mishnah is in Bechoros, Daf Mem Tet Amud Aleph, and so Mem Tet Amud Bet, excuse me. And so that's why did we need to teach it? Why did Rav Asi need to teach it at all? So B'Shel Devrayim Kesef Medina Itzrachalei. No, you forgot that there's a second half. Of course, the first half of his statement is why Rav Yosef raised it in connection with Beit Shammai, but there was a second half to the statement, namely that when it comes to rabbinically described kesef, we're talking about kesef Medina. And so as a result, that's what that denotes on, and that was not taught in the Mishnah. Titania, because here's an example of where we can see that it was not taught. Hatokeya lechavero nosin losela. That if you there are two ways to understand tokeya. One is that now this I guess is a nice daf yomi coincidence because we're tokeya the shofar in this time. So one is referring to blowing in somebody's ear where it's not a significant damage, but we're still going to say that there's some kind of embarrassment and humiliation associated with it, and we say that the person who does so has to pay a sela. The alternative understanding of hatokeya, which Rashi notes here, is that it could mean that you hit the person in the head. But in any event, below tema my sela, and we don't say what kind of sela it is in this Mishnah. And so as a result, this we're going to say so arba zuze elam. So is it the one that's worth 4 zuz, meaning 4 of the local dinars? No, elamai sela palga de zuzah. We're talking about it's a sela that is half of a zuz, and that is namely 1/8 the amount. The avidi inshe de karu palga de zuzah istere, and we're talking about the coin that is called an istera. That in fact, so the point is that we see that in fact, Rav Asi's statement is limited to where there's a fixed amount. And since there's no fixed amount when the Torah talks about kesef with respect to marriage, and so as a result, we're not going to give it a fixed amount and say that it has to be talking about the kesef of tzur, but rather it could be talking about even a pruta as reflected in Beit Hillel's position. Again, I think you could probably still answer that maybe Beit Shammai believes in the broader version of Rav Asi's statement that we have now rejected with respect to Rav Asi, because why did we reject it with respect to Rav Asi is only because we didn't want Rav Asi to only work with Beit Shammai. So we had to limit Rav Asi's statement so that it would work with both Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. But from Beis Shammai's perspective, maybe that's the point that Rav Yosef is making, that he would hold of a version of that statement that would say that basically every time we mention kesef in the Torah, it's referring to a dinar. Okay, so that is answer number 2. Answer number 3. We're now ready for answer number 3, and there we go to Reish Lakish. Reb Shimon ben Lakish Omer, Taimaihu de Beis Shammai kideh Chizkiah. That Beis Shammai's logic is like Chizkiah, the Amr Chizkiah, Amr Kra, the Hefdah. That when it comes to a woman who has been sold, a Jewish woman who's been sold as a Jewish maidservant, Milamed Shemigaraat Mipijona Viyotza, that when it says the hefta that she could be redeemed, means that her family has the ability to effectively buy her back. And how much do they have to pay in order to buy her back? It's not just that the amount is set by the new owner of this young woman, but rather it is set by the Torah that says that basically she can be redeemed for the amount that she paid, and in fact she can be redeemed for the amount that we paid minus however much time she worked for the master. So, for example, if she was sold at the age of 6 and she's going to go free at the age of 12, so then. And she was sold for 600 dinar. So then that's 100 dinar per year. And so if after the first year she wants to be redeemed, she would be redeemed for 500 dinar. Well, amra dinar. Now, if in fact if with respect to Chizkiah's statement that we allow her to be redeemed based on a reduction of the amount that was owed based on an annual a pro rata understanding of the price, well, that makes sense if we say that a dinar was given. But hainu de megarad va'azlo ad pruta, and that makes sense because then you can reduce the amount that is on an annual basis until there's just a pruta that's left to be owed. But if you would say that it was possible for the young woman, the amai vriyah, to be sold for just a pruta, mipruta migara, do you have the ability to reduce anything from a pruta? Of course not. And so as a result, the implication is that it must be, if we're not going to say it's a pruta, it's got to be the next coin up, which is a dinar. Well, 1 second, maybe you could say that Reish Lakish's understanding is the following. Hecha de Yahivla dinar, where a dinar was paid. So Tigra ba'ad pruta, then you have the ability to do a pro rata reduction in the value, and so the redemption could be go down until the pruta. But Hecha de Yahivla pruta. But if in fact the buyer bought this young lady for only a pruta, lo Tigra klal, then there would not be any kind of reduction. And maybe that's what we're talking about, and maybe that's the situation. So lo salkadaita, don't even think it, because a dumya to yud, we should, that the point is that it's similar to this concept of yud. Yud is, by the way, very much connected to ama ivriya, because usually the purpose of ama ivriya, of purchasing the young lady before she turns 12, is that they would act, the buyer or the buyer's son would marry the young lady, and so as a result, and that marriage is called yeyud. So my yeyud afal gav to boy miyayid, the boy lo miyayid, that when it comes to the owner, he has the ability to either perform yiyud or not. But kol hekad de lo matzah lo havizvine. But if in fact you were to try to sell this young lady to a relative who doesn't have the ability to marry her, we say that the sale is not a valid sale. So a person could not, in fact, sell his daughter to his son, because the son and the daughter would not be allowed to marry one another. So that would be an invalid transaction. So hachinami kol hekad lo matzi migra lo habizvinizvine. So too, Reish Lakish would say that anytime you are unable to sell, you're unable to have a reduction in the value based on the number of years that the woman has worked. So as a result, there's no possibility for a sale. And so as a result, the point is that you can't have a purchase of a Jewish maidservant for anything less than a dinar, because that's the next lowest coin. Well, 1 second, the Kiddushin Isha Lebeit Shammai Nafka Lahu Me'ama every and the Kiddushin Isha Lebeit Shammai Nafka Lahu Me'ama Ivriya. And Beit Shammai learns the law of kedusha of a woman for marriage from the law of a maidservant. So ma'ama avriya b'pruta lo makanya. Just as when it comes to a Jewish maidservant, she can't be purchased for less than for a pruta. Isha b'pruta lo makacha. So too, a pruta is not going to suffice for marriage. Well, 1 second, ve'ema palga dinar. Why don't we say that the smallest acquisition price of an ama ivriya, of a Jewish maidservant, is actually a half a dinar? Why did you have to go up to the next whole coinage? The ema shtei prutas, or say even that 2 prutas is sufficient. Why did you go up to the next major currency level? Well, kevan de apikte mi pruta ukma adinar. Again, because we removed the concept of pruta, we moved up to the next whole coinage, and so as a result, we move up to the dinar. And so now we've come up with the third answer. So again, our first answer is that we're talking about where she can accept less than a dinar, but we're talking about where she didn't know the amount that was being given to her. So we're going to say that it needs to be at least a dinar. And the second answer was that every time the Torah says kesef, it means silver, and therefore the lowest level of silver coinage is a dinar, and so as a result, it needs to be a dinar. That's answer number 2. And answer number 3 is now that we're learning it from ama ivriya. And since an ama ivriya can only be purchased with nothing less than a dinar, so too a woman can only be married with nothing less than a dinar. And now we have our fourth and final explanation, and with that we'll finish for today. So Rava Amar Hainu Taima de Beis Shammai. No, this is the reasoning of Beis Shammai. Shelo Yehu Benos Yisrael B'Kehefker. We don't want Jewish young ladies to be treated as if they were hefker, meaning that we 1 second, where's the Rashi on this? We have Rashi on it. Here's the Rashi. Hold on. Kehefker, I'm sorry, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 lines down in Rashi. Kehefker, liknos bidavar muat. We don't want her to be able to be acquired with something so small. Umidarabanan, and Rashi says that this is just a rabbinic requirement. Umidarabanan hu amri la Beit Shammai, and based on Beit Shammai, Beit Shammai is saying that the rabbis established the afka a rabbanan, the Kiddushin hapachusim medinar, that anything less than a dinar would not be considered a valid marriage. And so with that, we've now given 4 different explanations for Beit Shammai. Again, number 1 is that we're actually talking about nighttime, or when it's a messenger or an agent that's working on her behalf, and so she doesn't know the amount, and so she doesn't have the ability to just accept it. And so as a result, if it's less than a dinar, we'll say it's not valid, because we'll assume that she wouldn't have accepted it. So that's answer number 1. Answer number 2 is kesef. Anytime kesef is mentioned in the Torah, it actually means a dinar. And so as a result, that's, since we have kesef mistei efron, kika mistei efron, so that's going to tell us that kesef applies to a marriage. And so as a result, it's got to be at least a dinar. Again, that was based on Ravasi's statement, which we've learned could not actually apply to marriage, but nonetheless, maybe we could say that it would be still Beit Shammai's approach. Number 3 is like Chizkiah, that we learn marriage from Ama Ivriya, and an Ama Ivriya cannot be purchased for less than a dinar. So at 2, marriage can't happen for less than a dinar. And finally, we don't want our daughters to be treated like something hefker that is sold for such a small amount. So the rabbi said, actually, we're going to require a dinar. So those were the 4 answers. And so we spent today looking into Beit Shammai. We're now ready for Beit Hillel. But for that, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and look forward to continuing to learn it together. And now I see that Charlie has posted a couple of different points on the different kinds of coinage. I don't know if you want to make the points into the recording. You have
sure. Yeah. So there's a discussion in the Bava Metzia 47b, where there's an opinion that you can redeem Meister Sheni on an asimon. They are fairly early Tanayim that are cited in a Braita that is pretty much the same as Mishnah in Edyot and Meister Sheni. There are 3 other sources in Shas, in the Bavli, in Shabbat, Eruvim, and Pesachim that don't even mention that as a possibility. Those are Amoraic opinions. So clearly this was not permitted. This was something that was prohibited early on.
And from a historical perspective, is it?
Yes.
I presume that slugs were used before formal coinage.
That's got to be I actually think that what happened was that the rabbis realized that you need real money for an economy, and they made the use of slugs basically no longer valid for transactions.
Right.
Sort of a tikkun olam situation, because it's very clear that there were legitimate opinions by big Tanayim early on that you could. And it shows, it actually, I think, shows there are a couple things here that show the brings the rabbis. Another thing that they did, I didn't mention there, was they forbade the use of any coin that did not have an image of a face on it. The Tyre coins had images of Greek gods. The Roman coins had images of the emperors, some of whom were actually deified. Jewish coins didn't have images of people on them, and still don't to this day, even in the modern state of Israel. But because we suffered so badly in the Bar Kokhba revolt, they wanted to eliminate any possibility that we would be using banned coins, lest we be accused of rebelling, because printing many of your own coins without permission of the government is basically a serious act of rebellion.
Right. Well, we actually saw, right, that in Gittin, near the end of Gittin, how much the rabbis wanted to try to avoid rebellion, and that they
Yep.
required the usage of the dating based on the dating of the particular kingdom in which you found yourself. So that makes total sense. The other thing that I'll note here is that this is one of the areas where many say that that effectively sometimes the rabbis have the ability to define what the Torah is saying.
Yep.
That's, sometimes we're only explaining what the Torah is saying. But here, this is clearly a situation where effectively the rabbis are defining or redefining what is meant. And so that makes a lot of sense from that perspective.
Absolutely. We are rabbinic Jews.
Absolutely.
And another example of what you just of that dating, I didn't think of mentioning this, but in First Maccabees, which was originally written in Hebrew, we don't have the original anymore. That all of the dates there are in the years of the Seleucid kingdom.
Interesting.
Which was a very commonly used dating system for about 1,000 years. Which is, of course, not the Jewish calendar and not the Roman calendar, but this was commonly used even in Roman times in the Eastern Roman Empire. Another thing I noted that the Tyre coins were 94% silver, the Roman coins were 90% silver, so of higher quality. And eventually the Romans shut down the mint and Tyre, and they debased their own currency. I'm surprised that I've never found anything in Shas that discussed the impact of the debasement of the currency, but by the time that would have really had effect, it was in the Amoraic period, and most discussion was being done in Bavel, where the Persians had higher quality coinage.
Well, I will note that there is the whole concept, the whole, I think the fourth parak in Bava Metzia that we'll, God willing, get to in a few, maybe it's a year or so, will discusses the, exchanging of coins and how one does so without violating various rules associated with the interest and coin valuing and the like, and ONA. And so we'll be discussing that, and of course that certainly triggers the thought of part of what's involved in that discussion is a recognition that coin values can fluctuate. So
yes, and they even talk about Asimon's there as well. So
yeah.
Great point there.
Okay.
This is complicated and worthy of more research by rabbis and by academics.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I look forward to continuing our learning together and wish everyone a wonderful, wonderful day.
Yashar
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.